NATO leaders will meet in Washington on July the 9th to the 11th. Formed 75 years ago to counter the threat from Moscow, you could say little has changed. It's been over 2 years now since Russia's all-out invasion of Ukraine, and there seems to be no sign of an end to the war. But it won't just be the war on delegates' minds. Elections in France ahead of the summit could see the country embrace the far right. And then there is the US election in November that could mark the return to power of NATO skeptic Donald Trump. The summit will take steps to formalize or NATOize Western help for Ukraine. Training for Ukrainian troops will officially come under the NATO umbrella at the summit. Outgoing Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is calling on members to send more money and weapons. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will be there too, pushing for more help on the battlefield.
Mr. Stoltenberg had launched the idea to create a $100 billion fund to make sure the funding of weapons for Ukraine would be a long-term engagement from NATO. So it would be $100 billion over 5 years.
Sources inside NATO say Stoltenberg wants members to go further and commit 40 billion euros annually for Ukraine over 5 years. What happens away from the summit could be more important than what happens at the summit table. NATO leaders will meet in the immediate aftermath of a French parliamentary election. A victory for the far-right National Rally could severely impede French President Emmanuel Macron. He's been one of Ukraine's staunchest allies and met resistance from other NATO states after he suggested in February putting NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine. Then there is the US presidential election and a possible Trump return. Trump caused outrage in February when he said he would encourage Russia to attack NATO members who did not pay enough towards their own defense.
No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay.
Analysts say Stoltenberg's push for more funds up front for Ukraine is about Trump-proofing aid. Trump's possible return may also have influenced the recent decision to appoint Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte as Stoltenberg's successor. He takes over in October.
Mark Rutte is seen as a personata that can perhaps deal with the character of Mr. Trump. Mr. Rutte is a no-nonsense, practical-minded person, so there's hope that the Secretary General could perhaps develop some sort of relationship with Mr. Trump. Number two, I think that Mr. Trump always complained about money when it came to NATO, that Europeans were not paying up their contributions, so that has definitely changed. We see that apart from maybe 7 or 8 European member states, all other European member states are now contributing the 2% of their GDP to defense budgets or more. So NATO has this rule that you have to spend 2% of GDP on defense. So a grand majority of European nations are doing so now, and it was not the case during Mr. Trump's first presidency.
Trump has said he will end the war in Ukraine immediately if re-elected. How exactly he could do that remains to be seen. It was reported in June that 2 advisors to Trump had drafted a plan that would see the United States cut arms supplies for Ukraine unless it immediately sat down and negotiated with Russia. But a refusal by Moscow to negotiate would mean more US funding for Ukraine.
If Ukraine sticks to their peace plan and have the support from Europe for that, and in the case of a new American leadership, let's say it's not Mr. Biden prolonging his presidency, there could be a transatlantic difference there in terms of views regarding to Ukraine, and that, of course, we don't want to have.
The third day of the summit will be dedicated to China.
Think, for instance, about the role that China plays in terms of supporting Russia's war in Ukraine. There have been news messages that China is helping Russia actively when it comes to that. Think about Chinese disinformation in Europe as well. Think about how China is also trying to control critical infrastructure on this side of the Atlantic.
There's much to discuss in Washington, with the war in Ukraine continuing to concentrate minds. But some will have one eye on the US city of Milwaukee. That's where the Republican National Convention meets to formally endorse Trump as the party's candidate just days after the NATO summit wraps.